Good morning all. Welcome to our second Hospice Horizons webinar. We're very excited today to have a panel of some experienced speakers. So we've got Alistair Forbes from Alistair Forbes Architects, who's going to be talking us through enhancing staff wellbeing through the care and working environment. Debbie Raven, the former CEO at Thames Hospice, who's going to be talking about elevating the family and visitor experience. And then towards the end, I'll go through designing impactful hydrotherapy suites for children's hospices. So without further ado, let's go straight into enhancing staff wellbeing through the care and working environment. Over to you, Alistair.
Thanks, Joe. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for attending this morning. We're going to take you through this morning enhancing staff wellbeing through the care and working environment. And as architects, we're best placed to talk about that through the design process. So I'm going to really use two projects that I've been involved in. One is the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice in Glasgow, which was completed across a number of practices, but at Ryder Architecture latterly. And that is a £21 million bespoke 14-bed IPU hospice, and that's located in one of the parks in Glasgow, Bellahouston Park, on the south side of the city. Next slide, please, Joe. It's really quite a different project. It's quite a special project, and if you ever get the chance to visit, which I would recommend, you'll get that sense. There's a very different aesthetic in terms of the brief being for a boutique hotel model, and challenging some of the healthcare conventions, but at the same time a really innovative IPU layout, which was designed to the benefit of staff and really come out of some of the early discussions with staff. So the second project I'm going to talk about, and based on the things, is CHAS, which is the next slide, Joe. Children's hospices across Scotland, who are the main hospice palliative care provision for children in Scotland, aging from prenatal right through to 18-year-olds. So it's a wide-ranging age group demographic that they care for, as well as in hospitals and at home. They have two hospices, one at Balloch called Robin House, and the second that we're involved in is in Rachel House in Kinross, which is a £12 million extension and refurbishment of their existing children's hospice. So as I say, I'm really basing this around design drivers from the point of view of an architect. I'm involved in hospice design. And we often play down the backdrop. I think we consciously do that because of the important work that's going on in these building types. But it's more than that. Really, the backdrop is an active contributor, as we're saying there, to staff and in turn patient care. So although it's a backdrop, it's a very, very important backdrop. Next slide, please, Joe. And really, when we set out on these projects, we really we tackle everyone differently. And I think we consciously come at these to try and not say buzzwords and to try and not, every project is special, every hospice is very different, but we really try and start from the beginning, genuinely start from the beginning on every project because they're so different. And this was my first experience as a young architect many years ago now at Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice in their previous building next to the River Clyde, which was in the city centre of Glasgow. And the first day I was asked to spend time in the bed. So that's my feet in the bed. And I was there for a number of hours, and it was really about the things you don't see in the picture, the smells, the sounds, the noise, some of the procedures going on from staff, and really how could I understand that from a point of view of designing for privacy and dignity. Next slide, please. And similarly, recently at Rachel House Children's Hospice, we've again been kind of challenging convention and ourselves in that we're designing for children. And as adults, with all the baggage that we carry and our view of the world, we don't see it from children's perspective often enough. So what we've done in that project is we put GoPro cameras on children in wheelchairs and referred children lying prone in the bed. And as you enter the current building, which is a beautiful, a very lively space when you enter Rachel House, at the top image there, actually what children are confronted with is a stair, and what a barrier and what a message to send out that really hadn't been picked up as adults. And in the bottom image, this was images taken by a referred child lying prone in the bed at Christmas time. So the house was full of joy and life. And what the child in that situation sees is the ceiling. They're seeing smoke detectors, they're seeing lights, and a tiny bit of that Christmas decoration that was in the building. So we really try and see things from other people's perspective, both people using the building in all ways, including staff. The next slide, please. And importantly, when we start talking to staff early on about the design, we really don't, and honestly don't draw anything until we've had those first discussions. They're involved in the first sketches, and so that they see the design evolving in front of them. We take it away, we develop it, and we chat it through with them on a weekly basis, so that they're seeing their input evolving along with all the other key stakeholders. And it's really important for buy-in that they don't feel it's a fait accompli, which often it can sometimes be, and it's not been decided at top level and then trickling down. This is ground up. Next slide, please. And I think we've got to appreciate that a hospice as a workplace is even more complex than that simple label of workplace. It's completely different, and we often talk about the hospice as being the world in microcosm. It has to feel like home, but it has to deal with everything in daily life. And that daily life happens 24/7, 365 days a year. So we need to design clinical spaces, we need to design non-clinical spaces, catering, think about housekeeping, fundraising, events. It's a hugely complex workplace environment, as well as providing the kind of needs of space away, a time to relax, and connection to the outside. And just the slides and the images on the right refer to kind of how we go about these things, and we put a lot of importance on building visits, both in the UK and abroad. And the images on the top right-hand side there are Chad's visit. We went to Denmark with him to visit a number of hospice buildings at the end of last year, and that's really set quite a different direction and tone of the building. But equally as important to have these building visits that staff and senior leadership can say, we don't like that and that's not for us, and again, building that relationship. The image in the bottom right talks or just gives a hint of one of the spaces at PPWH, which is a roof space, a terrace space up at the roof level. And we have 4 of these types of spaces, 1 for conference, but another 3 for staff use. And they're quiet spaces with panorama views out over the gardens and the landscape. But we talked often with staff that these are a space to have a cry, to get away from families and get some personal space, quiet space and relaxation. But equally, this is a space that can be used for a gin and tonic on a Friday night, because, as I say, the hospice really is that world in microcosm. Next slide, please. And at PPWH, the clinical care model in terms of the IPU layout was really driven from those early discussions with staff on an analysis of their walking distances on a shift. We spend time on night shifts with staff early on. We've just done that recently with Chaz. But at PPWH, really what we were struck by was the amount of kilometres that staff were covering a night at their previous facility, and then we looked at that on the building visits with them. And what that led to was the Sengerton model, which means bed courtyard, and that is having storage space topped up from central stores with a central space. We took the nurses station out of that central space where you see the kind of grey box in the middle there, and created a variety of settings that nurses could sit and have a panopticon view of the bed head. It was very non-clinical. We took all of that out, connections to the outside space, and then to the bedrooms. Patients can choose through controls at the bed head how much they engage or close down with that central space. But it really has had quite an impact, and a positive impact on the team working at PPWH in terms of taking away passing traffic out of that space. It becomes a space that nursing staff and patients can take ownership of, and really simplifies and highlights that personal space. Okay, next slide, please. Also, there's a lot of emotions, high levels of stress can often happen in hospices. And what we've tried to do at Chaz is look at a space that's very much set aside, and that's traditionally the sanctuary space that you find in many hospices. But at the Children's Hospice at Rachel House, we're looking at that as quite a different space. The top left-hand side is probably its normal mode for small discussions, could be family space, could be staff having those discussions, but it has natural light, it has high quality joinery, which hides a lot of storage that needs. It also has its own dedicated garden space that you can move out to and be flooded with natural light. But we have designed that to have multi-modes, and each space within Rachel House really has these multi-modes, and going through that with staff and allowing them to really understand how the flexibility can be built into these spaces. So on the top right hand side, it can be used for christenings, it can be used for weddings even. We've had weddings at PPWH in their sanctuary space. On the bottom left, it can be used for relaxation classes or groups, but it can also on the bottom right turn into a really immersive experience for a child being brought in on a bed. So I think just really helping staff understand how these spaces are used, and we do that through a lot of 3D modelling that we do as standard. We know that as we go through the design process, a lot of people struggle to understand plans, so we really rely heavily on the kind of high quality 3D models that we do in-house to allow people to really understand how these spaces can be used. Next slide, please. And again, just taking that a step further in terms of the complexity of the workspace, what we found at Rachel House was the real importance of housekeeping and catering staff's relationship with children and families. They can often pick up on different things, moods, or how people are feeling through their more casual discussions with children and families, and the important information to pass on to others. So we've designed the kitchen servery in the top space as it's a very clean aesthetic, very contemporary aesthetic. The servery at the kitchen is designed as an island, like people would either like to or do have at home, the kitchen island. And on the left-hand side, they're really opening up that kitchen, the main back-of-house kitchen, so that even staff in there have got a view out onto the family lounge dining space that you see in the bottom image there. So where we do a perspective, we have an equal staff perspective so that they can see how they might see things. So being in the bottom, being able to see the dining table, the lounge in the distance, and the central play spaces that are so key to Rachel House on the left hand side, as well as that long view out into the garden. So I think kind of doing what we say of really seeing things from everybody's perspective. Next slide, please. And lastly, hospices are challenging in that they're a complex brief. So many spaces requiring ground floor and daylight, access to daylight into gardens, but they have to work. We know that from day one, that they can be beautiful, but they have to work. So we've been working really closely with Innova in terms of some of these detailing modelings and looking at how the hoist can recess back into cupboards, something that's very commonly done now, hoist being recessed into the tracks. But in the visuals, looking at each of these cupboards being able to open up, and we use those in terms of our discussions with NHSSU or with Health Improvement Scotland, and showing them the interior of these cupboards and medical clinical drug cupboards and things that are stored within those, as well as storage and the key features built into the bench seat there. So although these might look like pretty images, we're using these to work really hard with staff and other stakeholders so that they can firstly understand, but more importantly influence the design as we develop it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alistair. Very insightful, and what a great idea, putting GoPro on children's heads so you can see actually what they're seeing. A question's come up, a very good question. So is it challenging having input from a lot of staff members in the design stage? And what's your tips on how we go about that and incorporate all the input from all staff?
Yes, it is. It's really complex. A tip, I think, just make sure that your phone battery is charged all the time, because the amount of time we spend on the phone here having discussions, and I think that I don't say that flippantly, in that we can visualize things. There's a really intense meeting schedule, particularly just now on Chaz as we're going through the room data sheets, but just really important to talk and take those calls and have those other side meetings at meetings, that if you pick up and hear anything, then bring that into the discussion and talk about it openly. So yes, it is. I mean, multi-headed clients is always a challenge from a design team's point of view, but if we're going to genuinely listen to people, we have to do that and go through that pain on our side, because what we have heard, quite commonly on building visits is staff at the end of the day saying we didn't get what we asked for, and that's for a variety of reasons that but it's really important that we take staff right through that whole process, through the design, and it doesn't drop off once the design is complete. We're already on CHAS, which goes on site next summer, starting to organise building visits at regular intervals with staff, so that while the discussion is intense in design, it will also continue through those building visits as the building starts to be reworked and extensions coming out of the ground.
Thank you, Alistair. And you mentioned it earlier as well about the key for those other building visits. You can always learn, can't you, from others.
Yeah.
Give us a bit of an insight on any learnings you had from visiting hospices in Denmark.
I think it was a really fascinating 3-4 days visit, and I think it's easy to assume that we all look across the North Sea to Scandinavia and think they do everything perfectly, and it was really interesting how the hospice community is so welcoming to visitors and are happy to share their experiences, and on the basis of a phone call to an architect's office in Denmark. Everything kind of sprung from there. Yeah, we're happy to host you. So people will take the time and explain, but they'll also say what didn't work. So a lot of shared learnings on these things, and people are honest about that. We don't always get it right, but we are all. It feels collectively trying to get to the right point. So I think it's the openness. It's worth, as I say, seeing what didn't work and not repeating those mistakes when often we're facing the same challenges.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that. And just to encourage all as well, there's some great questions coming in on the chat. I think just the final thing, Alistair, just remind us the journey for the Prince and Princess of Wales Hospice. How long was it before that actually was built?
That was about an 8-year project. It was just over 8 years. So they were moving from a series of townhouses in the city centre of Glasgow. And we didn't have a site for the first 9 months. And that was really critical because it allowed us to get to know PPWH as an organisation, get to know staff, we got to know a lot of patients as well, which was lovely. And they really had an influence in the design. And then that first 9 months, we looked at 39 sites across the city, and then finally had Bellhausen Park gifted by the City Council, which was an amazing site. And from there, we had a 7-year design project, of which 2 were on site. But absolutely, I'd encourage anybody to visit PPWH. It's a very, as all the hospices are, they're special places, but PPWH is a fantastic building to visit in terms of some of their social enterprises, and it's now one of the busiest restaurants in the south side of Glasgow, with people visiting because they've really challenged what hospice means and that perception of it.
Thank you so much, Alistair. Very interesting, very insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to the second topic of this webinar, which is talking about elevating the hospice experience for family and visitors. So thank you, Debbie, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Joe. So my name is Debbie Raven. I was Chief Exec of Thames Hospice for 6 years, and throughout that whole 6 years, we were in the process of identifying the need for designing, building, and then opening a new hospice. So this was the old and the new hospice here. Our old hospice was opened in 1987, new one in 2020, and to reiterate Alistair's points about involving staff, but also family members, visitors, patients, absolutely critical. And we took on a lot of information. We asked the public as well about what they would want to see in a new hospice. And you get some really left field suggestions, and it's about weeding those out. But it's also about then it becomes very much a part of the community. And when you're building and designing something, which is so fundamental to that community, it's imperative that they feel an ownership of it too. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do today is talk you through the various areas in the hospice which I feel most support the family and visitors and loved ones experience. So starting with our cafe. So when you walked into the hospice, the first thing you walk into is the cafe, and you'll be able to see from the pictures there that this is an opportunity to both be welcoming and part of that community, but also to highlight what you're there to do. So you'll see in the background there our values of compassion, ambition, respect and excellence clearly on display there. The cafe is also an opportunity for income generation. So we had our memory tree in there, and much like the previous hospice, became so busy and was actually making quite a nice contribution to the fundraising of the hospice overall. But I think most importantly, the cafe was a great place for patients, their loved ones, family and visitors to get together. And there's nothing more heartwarming than seeing customers use the cafe, but alongside that there would be somebody in a bed who was having a coffee with their family, and it was a chance for a bit of normality and was an absolutely critical part of that experience. I'd like to share a story with you of a chap called Joe, who was a chap in his 70s who came in for end-of-life care, and he was from an Italian background, huge Italian family who wanted to have an early Christmas in October. So that was great. And we said, absolutely no problem at all. We can arrange that in Joe's room. But actually there were 40 of them. So we were able to use the cafe. We closed it early one night. They had a big family occasion. They all brought in their own food. And it was just a really good example of using this space for what it was designed for. And that was really heartwarming to see, and a very special occasion for Joe and his family. Next slide, please. So the other rooms that I think were really important for the families, visitors and loved ones, as well as patients, were the counsel and complementary therapy rooms. So Thames Hospice is, if you like, a hospice of two halves. So if you walk into the cafe, to the left is all of the outpatient area, counselling, complementary therapy rooms, and on to the right is the inpatient unit. That was designed specifically so that it took away that intimidation that sometimes people feel from being in an inpatient unit. And it meant that the rooms on the left-hand side, so the counselling complementary therapy rooms, were more likely to be used by families, visitors and loved ones, which meant we could reach out to more people in the community. The consequence of that was that people still felt very much attached to the hospice and were very keen to use the services that were on offer. But also, again, from an income generation perspective, we were able to contract with the CCG at the time for additional services, which if those rooms had been on the inpatient unit, I don't believe we would have got. So things like lymphedema therapy, some different counselling services, all of which use the skills and expertise in the hospice to the best effect, whilst also being part of the community and generating additional much needed recurring income. Next slide, please. So we also built a family room, and this is a room specifically a place for children and adults to go and be normal, well, as normal as possible in this situation. So we had a kitchenette in there. There was a dining area. So if the family wanted to come and make themselves a meal away from the inpatient unit, away from the hustle and bustle of the cafe, then this facility was there for them. I especially loved the hanging chair you see in the first picture, but I have to forewarn you that when CQC came round, we had to remove it. So it was really for high days and holidays. And where this room really came into its own was when we were dealing with families with children. So we had a lady called Christine right in the middle of COVID, and she came for withdrawal of treatment. She had two children, aged 8 and 5, and it was a very, very challenging time for her and her family. She'd had a golf buggy accident and had been a permanent vegetative state for 4 years before she came to us. But by using this room, her family, her husband and her children were able to stay for the whole time that she was with us, which was 5 days. We were able to utilise our children's social worker to support the children in what was a really traumatic experience for everybody involved. Even though they were well prepared, you can't begin to imagine what they must have been going through. So this room really came into its own for those sorts of circumstances. And it was a place where you would often go in and see teenagers gaming, for example, really trying to bring some normality into what is a very difficult and challenging time. Next slide, please. We also had a bereavement suite, and this is much akin to children's hospices, where we had a viewing room, we had this counselling room, and we also had a garden specifically for people who were using the bereavement suite. And at the time, it was one of the rooms that we ummed and ahed about, one of the suites we ummed and ahed about most of all, because it was a lot of space, was very expensive when we were spending a huge amount of money already. And I and others were not convinced of the time of the need for it, because most people will know that often loved ones prefer to be with their loved ones when they're at end of life, not necessarily seeing them in a different room. But then again, what we did find was that sometimes people couldn't get to the hospice in time to be with somebody at end of life. And this was a really good facility to enable people to have those last few hours, minutes, moments, whatever was required, in peace and away from hustle and bustle of the rest of the unit. It also very much came into its own during COVID, when we found that we had people who hadn't had the opportunity to spend time with their loved ones before they died. And we were able to offer this facility to people who'd not only died in the hospice, but we also took people who had died in the hospital, just to let people come and spend a bit of quiet time with their loved ones. And one lady really stays with me, and she was a lady who had her husband had died in the hospital, and she hadn't been able to see him at all. He came over to us. He died very shortly after coming over to us. And she arrived after he had died, but she was able to see him in the viewing room. And she spent a couple of days in the bereavement suite, coming and going with her family. She was both incredibly sad, but very, very angry. And this facility enabled her to express those emotions, and I hope helped her in her bereavement journey thereafter. So it was a very useful space, and I think really did come into its own, and I'm so pleased that we did invest in this in the end. Next slide, please. Outdoor terrace areas. So we were very fortunate that we had a lot of land. We were donated the land from one of our major donors very early in the process, before we started to design the hospice. So we already had this lined up, and we were donated 8 acres of land. And you can see there, there's a lake in the background. So it's really very, very beautiful. Because we had the land, we were able to ensure that each room had its own outdoor terrace. And this was really important for people to be able to actually get some space from the bedside, but still be very nearby. And being that close to nature is so soothing. And these were extremely well used. Sometimes I think a bit too well used. When people started bringing in their own barbecues and clothes horses, I did have a few words, but actually, you know, everybody needs to use the spaces that you have differently. And if that's what works for you, then that's absolutely fine. So if you can have outdoor terrace areas, then I think it's a really beneficial for patients, families, their loved ones, and visitors too. Also, again, during COVID, or if you've got somebody with some infection, it enables people to go into the rooms without coming through the rest of the hospice. And that was critical at certain parts of our journey, certainly. Next slide, please. So we've already talked, Alistair's touched on sanctuaries, and we indeed did have one. This was our quiet reflective space. As you can see, that the stained glass window leading into the sanctuary is actually a legacy from our previous hospice, from our previous building. And that's, if you're building a new facility, so important to recognise the legacy of the old. You really need to take supporters with you and take the community with you. And that was a critical part of what we did. We spent a huge amount of time listening to the community about what was important, what was it that they were going to miss from the old building that we could possibly help in the new. And I think we did that quite well. And part of that was bringing some things with us too, and reusing them. But again, we had weddings, we had events in here, we had some very moving ceremonies in here as well. We had an opening ceremony where we invited all the religious leaders of the community who came and did a blessing for the hospice, regardless of whatever religion. And that was really well attended by all parts of the community. And it's all about just bringing people in at every opportunity you possibly can. And maintaining those contacts and those relationships as well throughout the hospice journey. Next slide, please. Yes, overnight rooms. So another thing that we listened to the people visiting our hospice and the community was that they wanted somewhere where they could go and sleep, which wasn't in the patients' rooms. And so we built a room which had a double bed, it had an ensuite, and it was somewhere for somebody to go and sleep away from their loved ones, but still be in the building. And I was thinking, and I remember a gentleman came, the son of somebody, a lady in the hospice in our old building, came over from America. He had nowhere to stay, and we had to advise him to go to like a Premier Inn up the road, and actually it was really it was very unsatisfactory for him and for us as well. So having these overnight rooms was critical. Also meant that visitors could go and freshen up. They could have a shower. They could just have a bit of time out away from the bedside if they needed to. An unintended positive consequence of having an overnight room was with a chap we once had who was from Greece. He had a very passionate wife who was an influencer, so very glamorous, very lovely, but his mother came over from Greece and she was extremely matriarchal. What we didn't know was that these two women did not get on at all, and they actually came physically to blows one day in the over the bedside of this poor chap. So by having this overnight room, we were able to keep them separate, whilst respecting both of their wishes to be in the hospice at the same time, but not meeting each other. So yeah, it was very helpful to have this facility at that time. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I would say is I'd highlight what Alex has said. The building can be as beautiful as you want it to be, and indeed it should be an absolutely beautiful building, but it must work. And we made some mistakes on the way, and I think it's important to take those learnings and share them with other hospices, so that might not work for you, or it might. Every hospice is different, but I think if we can all share those learnings, then that's a positive thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Very insightful. It always never ceases to impress me, the care which is given in hospices, very precious moments of loved one's life. So thank you for sharing that. A few questions have come in. One would be, you just alluded to it then, but if you were to go through the same journey again, what would you do differently?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the big things that I would do, I think we would do differently, is it's getting a balance between perfection aesthetically and from a patient and visitor perspective, and actually objectively what works from an operational perspective. So at Thames we had, if you like, 3 fingers of the inpatient unit. So each and those fingers were wings. We had 10, and an 8-bed wing. which works beautifully from a patient perspective, because what we wanted was for patients to not to feel that they were part of a massive, great big building, because 28 beds is a lot of beds. But actually, operationally, it was very expensive, because each wing, if you like, had to have its own individual team of doctors and nurses. And it sometimes meant that the nurses and doctors working on those wings felt quite isolated, because in effect they were working in a 10 or an 8-bed unit. So certainly for me, if I had my time again, whilst I appreciate that worked really well from a patient perspective, I think there's a compromise there in maybe having 2 sides, so you can have a larger team looking after more patients.
Very useful, thank you. A question's come in: was your cafe open 24/7 for patients, families and visitors?
No, it wasn't. Originally that was our plan, but then we after some trial and error and some piloting of opening hours, we opened it at 8 in the morning and closed it at I think it was about 6 o'clock at night. If patients and visitors wanted refreshments in between, then that was certainly available. And on each wing we had a breakout area which had a kitchenette. It had a small seating area so that people could go and have a break there as well. So in effect we took what the cafe offered and provided in a much smaller scale.
Thank you. I think the final question would be, it was a total new build, wasn't it? So all the work would have been complete before patients moved in, but just share some tips around that journey from moving from the old hospice into the new one and managing that.
Okay, don't do it in the middle of COVID. So I remember one day, because we were building right in the middle of COVID as well, and there was one day we had like 150 people on site working, and literally overnight, I went down the next day, there were 3 people there. And I remember saying to our builders, who were absolutely superb, well, this isn't going to get built in time, is it? Because there's nobody here. However, saying that, we did deliver on time and in budget, because we managed to get special dispensation from the government to ensure that it was seen as a gold site, so we could get people back in and working. So I wouldn't do that. I think you've got to be brave. I think you've got to be brave both in terms of fundraising. So we started the build before we raised the money. I believe that if we hadn't, we still would not have started the build. So you have to create a sense of urgency, which is, I mean, at times terrifying and causes some sleepless nights. But you have to have faith that you know the community will deliver, and you also have to have a backup plan. You know, if it doesn't, we had a loan set up. Thankfully, we didn't need to pull it down, but it was there if we needed it. Things I would have done differently. I'd probably allowed a bit more time for staff to get used to the new hospice before moving patients in, because we moved people over fairly quickly. But in a way, you kind of have to, because if you running 2 sites is not really an option. It's not feasible for any length of time, because we've all got revenue challenges. So that was one thing. And I think my other learning would be, don't make things too complicated. I mean, it's great. There's so much you can do now in hospice care, so many wonderful things that you can have, like the immersive experience in the sanctuary and the children's hospice and that sort of thing. But what we found was even things like we put in our bathrooms, we had baths which did just about everything, would make you a gin and tonic, I think, if you asked it to. But our nurses didn't like to use them. And I think it was because they were a bit intimidated by them at the beginning. So if you are going to have these wonderful things, make sure that you spend a lot of time in supporting people to use them, because otherwise you spend a lot of money on really great kit, but it doesn't give the benefit to patients at the end of the day.
Thank you, Debbie. Again, very insightful. Appreciate everything you've shared there. And I'll have to come back and see what that bath is, which serves gin and tonics. I think I need one of those. Thank you. So we're conscious we're running ahead of time, but we thought we'd purposely do that rather than the opposite. So we'll move on now to designing impactful hydrotherapy suites for children's hospices. So you may already be aware, but a hydrotherapy pool typically is a 35-degree water temperature pool, and the numerous benefits that provides for children, in particular in a hospice setting, includes things like pain relief, muscle relaxation, improved mobility, sensory stimulation. But think of the emotional impact, you know, the special memories families can recall when they spent time with their loved ones in a hydrotherapy pool. So most children's hospices we're seeing out there have hydrotherapy pools already. And this next slide shows quite clearly the value that's put on a hydrotherapy pool in a hospice environment, with the quality of life. And I love that statement Martin House Children's Hospice have published on their website. It will be life-changing. You know, if there's one thing you can do to give families that precious moment they can go back to, it's been worthwhile. We thought we'd just share, we're currently working with Martin House Children's Hospice in Boston Spa. They've already done phase 1 of the refurbishment, and phase 2 includes a hydrotherapy pool. There's quite a few learnings we've had in going through this project, and the next slide I'll just pick out a few of them. But on the slide here you can see there's a 6 by 7 meter hydrotherapy pool in this top right hand corner, but it's so essential that space is planned around the hydrotherapy pool to ensure that you've got space and access from adjoining change rooms, plant room, which is according to standard. But you'll just see from a couple of snips we've taken from the 3D model here. But originally the hydrotherapy pool was right in the corner of the room up against the windows. And as we worked through the design with the clinicians, we soon realised that whilst it would give that lovely appearance right up against the window, it would make maintaining the windows and maintenance very difficult. And there wasn't space incorporated for a hydrotherapy pool cover. Now, with a hydrotherapy pool being 35-degree water temperature, it's essential we have a cover, which a cover alone can save £10,000 per year in running costs of that hydrotherapy pool. And the cover can be built into the pool structure, so it isn't seen from above. But just very briefly, a few learnings we learned, but essential that there's a good change room which has hoist access right into the pool. Keep the steps near where the change room is. And I think if we did this hydrotherapy pool again, we might look to even have wider steps to enable family to possibly even carry their young ones down into the pool in a supporting way. Here, this slide shows 2 different hydrotherapy pools. The one we see on the left-hand side is a hydrotherapy pool installed in someone's own home. So very homely, nice looking, the kind of pool which I'm sure any of us would be glad to have in our own homes. On the right-hand side, you've got a special needs SEND school, where more clinical in terms of how it looks, but essential, we've got the function absolutely spot on here, because you've got 50, 60 children typically going through that hydrotherapy pool every day, which puts a significant emphasis on the quality of the water and the plant, which enables it to maintain that high water quality. For a hospice, we're finding that we need a blend of those two. And the next slide shows 2 examples of how we can incorporate the 2 together. So we need something which looks homely, looks inviting, is warm, but also gives that clinical ease of cleaning and maintenance and infection control. Just while we're looking at two different pools here, one being a stainless type finish, the other being a mosaic tile, you can see this pool's out the ground. The one on the left is in the ground. We mainly see for new builds the benefit of having an in-ground pool enables access easier getting into the pool, and should there ever need to be an evacuation out the pool. Now, moving on then to lighting and the power of bringing a sensory experience. This is a time we've mentioned where loved ones are together, and we want to bring the best out of the children in the pool and the families. And there's many ways we can do that, but there's a lot of benefits in incorporating mood and sensory lighting, underwater jets, sensory wall art into pool environments. The image we're looking at here again is a special needs school, so a little bit more clinical in function, but gives some examples of how mood lighting, I've physically experienced myself being in a pool room, the lighting has been turned on, mood lighting, and you see the smile on the children's faces, and that's what we're looking to achieve here. But this image, I think, reflects very well the power of lighting being carefully considered and designed into a build project. So here you've got sleek uplighting. You've got no lights directly above the pool, which is very important because as children are being treated, often on their backs, they're looking up at the ceiling. So just like Alistair showed us, what are children seeing often could be the ceiling. Let's make it a warm environment for them. But you've got luxurious, tranquil ambience here, and there's lighting you can use as well as looking fantastic to ensure that safety, colour contrasting, and making sure you can see visually where the steps are or changing levels if there is that within the hydrotherapy pool. Plant room, whilst not the glamorous look of a pool, this is the heart of what ensures the pool is working effectively. So in designing a hydrotherapy pool, it's very important, bearing in mind the 35-degree water temperature means that bacteria multiply significantly quicker in that pool than if it was a standard warm water pool. And all the children in this pool are normally always vulnerable. So imperative that we have water quality in this pool which is safer than drinking water. And we achieve that by certain compliance, but one of those is all of the water in that hydrotherapy pool has to go through the filters every hour. So if you think of that, the bigger the pool, the bigger the plant room, to ensure that we've got that water circulation to maintain the key safety and quality of that water. And there's, I won't elaborate on this too much, but there's a lot of advances now in traceability online, so we can monitor levels of the quality of that water, the chlorine levels, the automatic dosing, and make modifications online before having to actually make manual intervention in the plant room. The other aspect you'll see on the left hand side here is an air handling unit. So you might have a fantastic looking structure of the pool, nice mosaic tiled finish set into the ground, you've got excellent water quality, but that's no good unless the air temperature and air humidity in that pool room is controlled to ensure that you've got a working environment that works for any temperature, any time of the year. This, we wanted to just show two examples here. This is an example of what looks to be a very luxurious space. I love the idea of the star type sensory lighting in the ceiling, but from a practicality point of view, you've got a pool here which actually isn't too easy for users to walk in and out of. You haven't got a grab rail inside the pool for children and parents to hold on to while they're either having treatment or just using it for therapy space. So whilst looks fantastic, there's not enough circulation space, there's no hoisting access. The pool is very close to the wall here, meaning again that, bearing in mind you may not only have the children from the hospice being treated in this pool, but you'll have other family members, and imperative that we have the right safety aspects looked into, the colour contrasting, and it's designed well to give that balance of safety yet making it look right. So the opposite effect here, you've got a pool which is actually slightly raised out the ground to prevent wheelchair users from going into the edge of the pool, but it looks too clinical in function for what we'd be looking to achieve in a hospice environment. But you can't quite see on this one, but there's the inbuilt lights and jets, which you can see, the grab rail just under the water level. But one thing always to bear in mind as well for an out of ground pool is that you need more space, because you've got to have steps to go up before you can go down into the pool. And these steps can take up valuable treatment space, so carefully considering the design of those is also very key. Just wanted to share before we finish a couple of success stories. We're involved in so many different environments, hydrotherapy pools being installed in people's own homes, as well as special needs schools, as well as hospices and care homes and other environments. But success for me is seeing that smile on the child's face, you know, just seeing actually the benefit she's getting from being in that pool, almost defying gravity. And it's just a precious moment where loved ones can spend time together. Another one is here, this gentleman. Again, you can see the smile on his face as he's being treated. I've had patients say to me that when I'm in a hydrotherapy pool, I feel normal, because I can do just as what I can do in that pool is just what everyone else can do round about me. But in every scenario, there's different challenges and design considerations. And we're here from Innova to support hospices to ensure that design is carefully considered. I love how Alistair mentioned about going to other hospices to share learnings from them. Absolutely what we'd emphasise to ensure that there's no mistakes and it's designed correctly, and then blends the environment in terms of the therapy, the safety, and then the experience you can achieve in that pool of joy and true joy. Very glad to open up for any of the questions which have come in. A question has just come in now as to, is there a minimum size a hydrotherapy pool should be? Great question. So it depends how many users you're wanting to treat or have in the pool at one time. For a multi-user pool, we would never really see smaller than a 6x4 as a good sized pool for a number of patients. For a one-on-one hydrotherapy pool, we wouldn't recommend any smaller than a 3x2, which gives space for one user, a therapist, and typically additional support therapist. A question has also come in, is there a lot of training that hospice staff would need to have a hydrotherapy pool for cleaning and maintenance? Yes, there is some certain amount of training we need to go through. We would always, as standard, recommend a PUTAG 3-day training course dedicated for the operator of that pool. However, there is so much support and automation online now which can be done to minimize the amount of cleaning and maintenance which needs to be done to that pool. And one of the key things there is ensuring that there's a good maintenance package, including monthly maintenance checks to ensure that everything's been done safely and to standards. Thank you all for attending. Trust we found this useful. There's just one more question I've just seen come in. Do you specialise in new build design only, or do you work with hospices looking to refurb certain areas? Both, yes. We're involved in a lot of new build schemes, but also in a lot of refurbishment schemes, not only on hydrotherapy pools, but for full hospice working environments. The picture we can actually see on the slide here is Martin House Children's Hospice. It's their new family space. Just for everyone's interest, I should have mentioned that earlier. So thank you again. Thanks all for attending. There will be a recording made available. There'll also be a survey sent round, which we would appreciate your input on. Thank you and have a good rest of the day.